Vamos a ver, muy bien. Muy buenas noches para todos. Buenas noches, Lisette. Espero que me estés escuchando. We are going to start with our third web conference. I am going to share my screen with you so we can start with tonight's web conference. Muy bien. Okay, so tonight's web conference is called Envisaging New Environments, and we are talking about our stage 4 of this particular task that we're working on. So welcome to this this third web conference for stage 4 on the course Autonomy and Language Learning Environments. As we move on to the presentation, we have today's agenda. And today's agenda, first, we are going to understand about learning environments and those foundational concepts and theoretical perspectives that we should understand from those leading authors that we've been reading on. Second, we are going to talk about key factors of these characteristics, 5 essential elements that define effective learning environments. Number 3, we are going to talk a little about didactic strategies for autonomy. And we will continue with synthesizing theory and practice to design optimal language learning spaces. And finally, number 5, we will reach for insights and some reflections. I hope that you can participate. So first of all, let's start with understanding learning environments. So we are going to talk about some foundational concepts that are important. And first, I would like to talk about one of the authors, Rodriguez, when he talks about ambientes de aprendizaje. Estos ambientes de aprendizaje or learning environments are dynamic spaces. So we need to keep in mind that this particularly has to do with how we make the learning environments attractive and constructive for our students. So these not only deal with the classrooms themselves, but also with digital spaces, platforms, communities, and the interactions that we have with those different things. Then moving on with Movcharm, we have what makes a good learning environment. And this particularly has to do with emotional safety. So if I feel safe, emotionally safe, then I will have more space for learning. I will have more engagement, motivation, and ultimately a more effective educational process. So if I think of my students, this author in particular talks about emotional safety. So it's important that we consider that the learning environments are multidimensional and they provide not only language learning, but also need to develop autonomy specifically for our students. So there are some theoretical perspectives that I want to talk about. And the first one is about the author Hayek. He mentions the characteristics of a highly efficient learning environment. So he talks about adaptability, that it needs to be learner-centered, and the mediator needs to provide constant feedback to keep the instruction informed. Okay, and also we talk about this other author in 2013, and where he talks about the essentials of the foreign, when we talk about the essentials of the foreign language learning environment. Welcome, Lisette. Can you hear me? Well, I hope you do. Well, now we are going to talk about these three different authors, which are very important and they're part of our references. I want you to think of learning environments as dynamic, adaptable, learner-centered, and also that they need to have the physical conditions so that the professor, the teacher, can not only transmit knowledge, but also consider this a safe place for learning. So this final author from Al-Kawani from 2018 talks about the influence of the learning environments on learners' autonomy. The learner environments significantly influences the learner's autonomy. So he did a comparative study of Polish and Yemeni EFL learners, and he reveals that there are cultural contextual factors that are key when we are mediating these roles. So it's important that we consider the context. These authors have something in common where they mention that the classrooms, the learning environments, the platforms, the virtual environments, they need to be adaptable, they need to be learner-centered, and they'll also need to have all the physical conditions to be able to get the student engaged in this learning process. And considering also their cultural background. Cultural awareness is important when it comes to the classroom itself. So, to synthesize, multiple theoretical lenses converge on a common insight. The common insight is that effective learning environments integrate physical, pedagogical, and affective dimensions. Okay, so we need to have in this learning environment all these three conditions: physical, pedagogical, and affective dimensions. No single factor can determine if it's going to be successful or not, but the synergy of the three of them, of all of them, will help the learning process. It's also important to design learner-centered, meaningful activities so that I can constantly be encouraging the student to be autonomous and also giving him feedback so he knows which way he's going. And when it comes to the second part of our talk tonight, we talk about key factors and characteristics, and there are 5 essential elements that define effective learning environments for language learning. So if we look at this right here, we have these 5, we have these 5 critical factors for effective environments. These factors are collaborative learning, learner-centered approach, continuous feedback, emotional safety and engagement, and finally, technology integration. All of this, if we think of how these 5 factors have an effect on the student's learning process, we need to think of them as the foundation for both language learning and autonomy development. So it's for both of them. Okay. First of all, collaborative learning. We know that when we interact with others, we engage in meaningful dialogue, and then we are able to build language together. Secondly, it's important that all those activities, those things that are done, are considered to be learners-centered, so that my student is the center of the learning process, and the classes, the activities, everything that I do is tailored for him. Continuous feedback. The mediator then becomes part of the learning process by being constantly present in this process. It's important to keep this place safe. So when students feel safe and valued, they will learn easier. They are able to take risks and experiment with different information. That way, they are able to keep motivation up high and construct knowledge with others. And of course, we need to integrate technology because nowadays, technologies extends the learning beyond the classroom and helps the students have learning that is tailored for them. So the professors, the teachers are personalizing those teaching pathways so that the students can learn in their own way. So when we go back to this comparative study, I want to focus here because I think it's important that we look at these four different things that this particular author, Al Kaulani, found in his study. So he's found that self-directed learning um, gives opportunities for the student to foster greater autonomy. Also, choice in learning pathways. We need to give our students different options when it comes to learning. Our students will be able to comprehend a little better if we are more open to the process. Also, keeping a reflective and having structured opportunities for self-assessment. The students need to stop and think about the process. Remember that we're talking about autonomy, and we're not fostering only, language learning, but also we are fostering autonomy. How can I help my students become autonomous during this process right here? How do I do that? How can I help them? Well, this particular author take us through different steps where I can go ahead and foster autonomy in my students. As Rodriguez from 2014 mentions, he says autonomy develops when learners can make decisions about their learning process with a supportive structure. It is then our job as teachers to create this supportive structure. The structure is not only to teach language, in this case, English, but it's also to create different spaces where the student will be able to choose and become an active agent of his learning process. Then he will start reflecting about how he's learning. If I give him structured opportunities for self-assessment, then this will develop metacognitive awareness. If I don't give my student the opportunity to think, to reflect over what he's been learning, then there won't be opportunities for him to self-reflect and say, hey, yes, I am going down the same road. Maybe I can change a little. Maybe I can switch some things that I'm not doing well. It could really help the student get this autonomy that he needs. So each environmental factor must explicitly connect autonomy development with the learning process. The teacher then needs to be in charge of the necessary support system. So remember that feedback is part of this process that needs to be engaged into the learning process of the students. So when we talk about this third point, I wanted to talk about didactic strategies for autonomy. So these didactic strategies takes us to the practical of the thing. So when we think of different strategies, if we talk about collaborative learning, Maybe we can think of peer feedback, and we can talk about group multimedia projects. Remember that when we talk about student-centered learning, the teacher assumes a specific role. And this role, for this particular moment, this role will be the facilitator, the monitor, or the formative feedback provider. Which role are you going to assume? Here, you cannot find something like just the teacher, just the person who gives information and you are standing on your own, just transmitting knowledge. This road is a two-way road, and that is important to consider. It's important to consider that our role as a teacher takes a shift. It shifts towards the facilitator when we design activities that provide resources rather than just teaching or giving direct processes of learning. So when we become a monitor, we observe the process. We ensure that everybody's participating. And also we identify all those areas that need support. That's why the teacher assumes these different roles within the learning process. We need to keep this in mind because sometimes we think that the learning happens only and is only responsibility of the student. The learning process is a joint responsibility. Okay, so we need to assume our role, and the student will assume his role as well. Other strategies, I'm sorry, that we could use is digital portfolios. We can have community circles when it comes to emotional safety. Other strategies could be a flipped classroom model or a virtual exchange program. These different strategies create a comprehensive ecosystem where learning language, in this case English specifically, and becoming autonomous are developed simultaneously. So each step is designed to shift the responsibility from the teacher to the student, to the learner. But that teacher has the responsibility to scaffold the necessary steps for the student to get there. So it's not to leave the student alone by himself and that's it. It's to help him along the way. So think of these strategies as helpful ways to promote learning and autonomy at the same time. Oops. Okay. Here we have envisioning this ideal environment. We all envision ideal environments that we wish that we could have. And these ideal environments that I would like to synthesize here is to have flexible spaces. We need to have adaptable physical support, whether if it's individual or if it's group work or in pairs. But I need to be able to flexibilize my teaching. I need to integrate technology. Remember that if we think about the 5 authors from this particular task, stage 4, they all converge in the fact that a learning environment emerges from a dynamic ecosystem. So this dynamic ecosystem is multidimensional. When we talk about learning happens all the time, at all moments, but it is our responsibility to create those spaces through integration of technology, having formative assessment, Continuous feedback. We forget the power of feedback. Feedback will promote reflective and self-evaluation. The learner will think about his process, think about what he's doing, and promote these spaces will help you create these structures that are needed. Affective support and autonomous pathways. When we have self-directed learning, these learners will choose those pathways, those routes that will help them understand at the end, understand what's happening, understand how he can learn, right? So according to these authors, the ideal environment balances structure with flexibility, guidance with autonomy, and individual learning with social collaboration. So this ideal environment is never static, it's a dynamic ecosystem. It evolves, it changes, it moves according to the learner's needs and the context. So important to get to know your learner, important to know his context. This will give you a starting point to understand his needs. Okay, and now we are coming close to the end. And now we are going to talk about some key findings. Okay, and these key findings are important to reflect about. So the essential of the foreign language learning environment for pre-service EFL teachers, coming from that article itself, it was found that the element was teacher characteristics and behavior. The key aspect for that was guidance, rapport, and expertise. Physical classroom conditions, layout, comfort, and resources. Classroom activities and methods, engagement, interaction, and tasks. And peer relationship and atmosphere, collaboration, safety, and support. So this research has some implications with it. So the teacher emerges from this research as the most influential element. This reminding us the importance of our role, the importance of assuming the role correctly. And also it's important that to consider that the cultural context will mediate all these environmental factors that will help the learning happen. And I leave you with these questions right here. How would you rearrange these priorities in your context? Would this ranking apply to your country? What cultural factors might shift these priorities? So I'm wondering if Lisette can hear me.
Yes, teacher.
Ok,
Estoy escuchando.
si te preguntara a ti, estas prioridades que se ven aquí en este estudio, el autor encontró unas prioridades. Entonces, esas prioridades, por ejemplo, en el elemento del profesor, Teacher Characteristics and Behavior, los aspectos claves eran la guía, el feedback y la experticia misma del docente. Si miramos estos rankings, están en orden de importancia para este autor. Si yo te pregunto a ti, ¿cuál sería el orden de importancia para ti? ¿Tú estás de acuerdo en este orden de importancia o pondrías otro de primero? ¿Qué opinas?
In your opinion, according to the study, the author ranked the environment elements in the following order of importance: teacher characteristics and behavior guidance, rapport, expert, And two, physical classroom condition. And three, technician material and records. And four, classroom activities and methods. And five, peer relationship and more peer. This means that the teacher considers the most important factor in the learning environment. I will keep the same order or change it. In my opinion, I mostly agree with this order, especially placing the teacher as the most important element because the teacher guides the learning process and create meaningful connection with the student. Wherever I will sit slide, change the order by placing peer relationship and classroom atmosphere in a higher position, maybe third place. I believe that the student learn it better when they feel safe, supported, and comfortable with their classmate. A positive environment can strongly influence motivation and participation. So my proposed order will be one, be teacher characteristics and behavior. Two, physical classroom condition. Three, peer relationships and atmosphere. Four, teaching material and records. Five, classroom activity and methods.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that peer relationship and atmosphere, if the student feels safe, if the students feel safe right here, if they feel safe and if they have support, they will collaborate and they will be able to have a better interaction and have a more successful learning process. I agree with you. Okay, so um, here I have this quote for you, and it says the environment we create in our classroom shapes not just what our students learn, but how they learn to learn. And here we go back to metacognitive ability. Metacognitive ability. How do I learn? We learn to learn. We need to keep our students motivated, engaged, and give them the support structure so that they can start their learning process and also walk the pathway of autonomy sufficiently so that they don't have many problems and they don't get frustrated and we are able to transmit knowledge a little bit more.
Okay.
So,
Teacher,
sí.
one question. En esta actividad debemos, ahí decía la guía que hablar sobre la película, que de hecho fue muy gratificante. No sé si hay algún punto o ya se finalizó la clase.
Cuéntame, ¿no? Dime, ¿tienes la pregunta? Permíteme, voy a parar la grabación.
Sí.
Momento. Okay, I'm going to stop recording. Listo.